Okay, welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for today, March 27th, 2024. We have the great Roger Munter tonight. Roger is a maven about the Giants farm system, the minor leagues. We're going to get to him in a few minutes. Just some housekeeping here. First of all, happy opening day to all of you. May the sun shine on the Giants this year. We could use a nice season. Those who are celebrating Easter, happy Easter as well on Sunday. Our next meeting will be in 2 weeks with Andrew Goldblatt. Andrew wrote a book a few years back called 4 Cities, 2 Teams, 1 Rivalry, the Giants and the Dodgers. Anybody who donated money to the Say Hey Foundation, your check should have been cashed. Some of you were asking me, so I hope that happened. I will be sending out in the next day or two our online paper, the Polo Grounder. It has the dates of the next 12 meetings right up until August. There's a couple of empty dates that I'm still working on, but I think it looks good. I want to share one thing.
You don't have to.
I'm sorry?
You don't have to fill in all the dates.
Okay. One other thing before I go any further. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to know to mute when somebody is talking. Okay? A lot of times I mute you and you unmute yourself. It doesn't work that way. Okay? If you have to talk after somebody, Gary, could I just interrupt? Say to that. I mean, we have. If you have to interrupt if Dan Taylor is asking questions and Dan is talking to Roger, and then Dan says, thank you very much, and then somebody jumps in, no good. Raise your hand, or Gary, could I just, pertaining to what Dan say, do you mind if I say something? Okay. Let me just share something with you. Here it is. Okay, let's see where this is. And of course, I won't find it now because I want to find it. There it is. I'm thinking about next year possibly having a 1 or 2 day symposium with our group in Manhattan.
Oh, nice.
I went to a Sabre meeting this weekend. It was a great place. They had a little room that you could sell books on, so I would get some people who have new books to sell. The day then would be turned over to 6 people who I would get in touch with, who would hold a panel meeting having to do with the New York Giants and the San Francisco Giants. The following day, hopefully we would take a tour of the Polo Grounds and then attend either a Met Giant game or a Giant Met game or a Giant Yankee game. The symposium would revolve around when the Giants are in town for one of those 2 things. So guys can make comments, send me emails. We'll talk about it, but we can talk about that after.
No.
Where?
I have to find it.
Okay. Now, it is my privilege to introduce Roger Munter to the New York Giants Preservation Society. Roger is in charge of There Are Giants. Geez, we just don't understand. It's not this difficult. There Are Giants website, which is devoted to the Giants farm system. He knows more about it than anybody I could think of, and his podcast and his articles are just fabulous. So Roger is going to tell us a little bit about himself, about his page, and then the rest of the time it'll be a Q&A. A lot of you have many questions about the Giant farm hands, and Roger will answer them probably better than anybody. So let's give a nice warm round of applause to Roger Munter. Roger, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for having me attend. This is really fun, and thank you all for inviting me on. As Gary said, my name is Roger Munter. I have a site called Their Giants, in which I write thousands and thousands of words about the Giants farm system. I wonder if I can actually just show. No, I can't, because Gary has disabled that.
Oh, no, I could give it to you, no problem. There you go.
I'm going to see if I can show you my site. Goodness gracious, none of this looks familiar to me, but yeah, let's see. If I do that, of course, I'm going to run into technology. Anyway, I have been writing about, I've been writing professionally about the Giant system for about a dozen years. I originally started writing at McCovey Chronicles. Grant Brisby, who's now with The Athletic, was always after me to do his minor league coverage, and he finally talked me into it, and I started writing a daily report on everything that happened in the farm system. A little comprehensively because I have a disease where I can't stop writing words. But my interest in the Giants minor leagues and in player development in general goes back much further. When I was a kid growing up in California, 12, 13 years old, the daily newspaper in my house was the Fresno Bee. And I read the Fresno Bee. I remember 1974. I read the Fresno Bee, the Giants lost. There's a big story about how the Giants stumbled their way through another loss. Right beneath that, there'd be a story about the Fresno Giants, who were on their way to a dominating Cal League championship that year, winning a game, and they had all these young stars, and my 12 or 13-year-old imagination was fired by that. I remember Jack Clark was on that team. I think he was 18, and had a tremendous year and ended up in the big leagues that September. So I've long had an interest in farm systems and player development, and over the last 15 years or so, I've gotten more and more into it, to the point that 4 years ago, I decided to give up my day job and just start this site and spend my time covering the Giants farm system. I go to as many games as I can. I live in Washington, D.C., which isn't too conducive, but I drive to Richmond and catch all of their games there. I have a press pass for them, and I'll come see them on the road. I usually try to fly to both Eugene and San Jose, which are the two A-ball teams, at least once a year. I usually get out to Arizona to see the rookie complex once a year. And I was talking to some Giants officials last week when I was at their minor league camp about maybe going to the Dominican Republic to see their facilities there, either this year or next year. So I do what I can to get around to see all the players, talk to as many players as I can. And then, of course, I report on that every day, and I have a podcast, as Gary mentioned, and the site puts out a post usually every day, Monday through Friday during the season, where I go over just everything that catches my interest in the farm that day, and all the highlights I can manage to put up. And I have lots of video that I shoot myself. So that's what I'm doing at my site. And I think Gary's right. I think maybe I have, through doing this for a few years, gotten the lion's share of information on everybody in this system and kind of how people feel about them. And I get lots of, compliments from people like you and Gary, and also scouts around the industry who I keep up with. So it's been a very gratifying few years for me doing this, following what I really love on a daily basis. And with that said, I'm happy to kind of delve into whatever interests you on the Giants farm system.
Great. For those who don't know, Roger has a pay site and a free site, and I gave you that link, and it'll be sent after the recording of this takes place. Roger, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Start us off.
Sure.
The name. There Are Giants. Is that just a play on words, or is it the R for Roger? Talk to us.
So I will admit I'm probably not the best namer in the world, and naming things is a real talent. I think you have to have a great sense of puns, for one thing. But when I was writing at McCovey Chronicles, the section of the website that I did all my stuff was called They Might Be Giants, which is the perfect name for Giants prospects, because literally they might grow up to be Giants. You may or may not know that was taken from an actual band, kind of an indie rock band that was popular in the 90s. So when I went to start my site, while I really wanted that name because I thought it was perfect, I was slightly afraid that I would run afoul of this band's intellectual property if I actually tried to name a website that. So I shied away from that. But my heart was set on something like that. So I ended up taking my initial, Roger, as R. So it's There Are Giants with just R rather than ARE. That's my little cute thing. Instead of They Might Be Giants, There Are Giants, with the same sense that there are giants growing, there are giants coming, and I focus on them. I don't know if it's the best name in the world, but after a while, any name, it's like just time helps you when it comes to names because people associate with me with the brand.
Terrific. Okay. My friend Dean, who's on tonight, we always had this comment that if you're not going to be good, at least not be good with youth. I am a little tired of mediocrity. I see Yastrzemski and Slater, and then I'm told Matos may not make the team, which very much upsets me. Now, I know this year is not even played out, but next year, I see, again, mediocrity platoon at first base between Wilmer Flores and Lamont Wade. They're major leaguers. They'd be better served being on the bench. How far are we away from seeing Bryce Eldridge?
How far are we from seeing Bryce Eldridge? Now, there's a question for a 19-year-old who has only played about 2 weeks in A-ball. I'm going to back out of that and I'll come back around to that question. I will say that as somebody who has followed prospects for a long, long time, you can spend a decade being mediocre with youth. It's not that hard. Maybe this is my Giants of the 70s talking, because you may recall the Giants of the 70s actually brought up a lot of really good young players who went on to have good careers without themselves actually ever being good, which was quite a trick. But you can watch franchises, the Pirates, the Royals. There are franchises that are terrible for literal decades who are constantly having a youth movement. They're constantly playing the kids. It's an easy thing everybody wants the shiny new guy who could be a star. But the fact is, it's a high bar to clear, and not that many people ultimately prove to be good big leaguers. A lot of people are going to fall short. Even the best minor leaguers are going to fall short. And if you're always just hoping for the future, I think most of the time that future is going to recede before your eyes. Mixing in, your best players and the players who grab opportunities and run with them with people who are proven major leaguers, who are proven to produce, I think that tends to be the best plan, both strategically for a team, but also it's better for the young players who have people to show them their way, who are not like playing with the burden of expectations on their shoulders necessarily, which doesn't always produce the best results. A lot of times it's good for young players to go to a bad team that can afford to give them, 700 at bats, and it doesn't matter if they're good or not. Do that for a couple of years, and then they get to be good, and they go to a good team. That's a path you see. So although I follow kind of player development religiously, I'm rarely a person who says, let's just see all the young people, because seeing all the young people is often a way to throw away time. I think people get the opportunity, and in this game, you don't always get a lot of them. You have to make the most of them. We've seen players' opportunities pass. Joey Bart, he's probably not going to be with this club much longer. I don't know how much longer Elliot Ramos is going to be with this club. You have to grab those opportunities and show you belong. I think that's the plan with Louis Matos. I know you were talking about my podcast with Kerry Crowley, and we talked about this specifically. Mike Yastrzemski has a long history of hamstring issues. Austin Slater has an elbow thing that's been bothering him for 5 years. Michael Conforto missed an entire year 2 years ago. Louis Matos is going to get 300-400 at bats this year. I don't see any way around that because there's not much outfield depth behind him. And then it's up to him to take that job and not give it back. And that can happen. Austin Slater can go on the 7-day IL right now and not have a job 3 weeks from now. That happens. Or we can see what happened last year where, Casey Schmidt's given 300 at bats and Matos has given a lot of at bats, and they didn't take that job and grab it. They gave someone else the opportunity. So what we're going to have to see with these guys, whether it's Luciano or Matos or Meckler, whoever is, they're going to have to take an opportunity at some point and run with it and prove that the job is theirs and not somebody else's. So Luciano, who's now 22, I saw him in rookie ball when he was a 17-year-old in 2019. And he was doing a lot of the same things that we see Bryce Eldridge do now. He was hitting balls 119 miles an hour. He was just destroying pitching. But it's taken him 4 or 5 years now. Now there was the pandemic year in between, 2020, where no minor league baseball was played, which obviously hurt his development. But still, it's been 4 years solid for him trying to get from the rookie ball to the majors. Bryce Eldridge is going to start in low A this year. He's 19. He is a huge, huge guy with just extraordinary power, especially to the opposite field. He has a really good idea of the strike zone. He has a pretty short swing for a guy with what they call long levers, long arms. He's 6'7", which is about as high as anybody's ever gone in baseball. He's going to be an A ball this year. If he were in the majors in 2026, at the end of 2026, it would be an extremely rapid development story. That would be like a best case scenario. A more likely case scenario is maybe 2027. But, guys speed up and slow down. It all depends on what he does when he gets the opportunity out there.
Roger, thanks so much. One last thing. If you were to pick one guy this year who you think from the farm system is going to make the biggest impact, who would it be?
Well, very easily my answer to that is Kyle Harrison, because I have been a huge proponent of Kyle Harrison almost literally from the first day he stepped on a field. And I want to say it's easy to see the stats and how dominant he is and look at his fastball. From the very first time I met him, and he was 19 when I met him, you talked to him and he sounded like somebody in their 30s. He has always been an extraordinarily mature beyond his age individual. Nothing seems too big for him. He always understands kind of where he fits in his context, in the environment. He knows how to self-assess. He knows how to work hard. He's really competitive. And he's just, if you talk to him, he's almost more impressive than if you watch him pitch. If you watch him pitch, he's also extremely impressive. He's a giant of a kid, and that doesn't always come across on TV. But he's a big, almost like Madison Bumgarner, just a big human with real strength, real competitive fire, and a mind that can assess what he is doing well and what he's doing wrong and problem solve. And I think you put those things together and that's how you get to be a successful major leaguer. I really think he and Logan Webb are going to be, kind of a tag team, a 1A and 1B for this club for a few years. And I'm very excited to see what he does this year.
Thank you so much. Mars, you are up.
Thank you, Roger, for joining us. I have, first I have a statement, then I have a pressing question, which is kind of tough to answer. If I was going to assess a ball player, let's take a pitcher. In winter ball, I would have major league pitchers with the best stuff on that ball club throw to that highly talented hitter, and then I would have a highly talented pitcher that scouts rave about pitch against the best hitters on the club. Now, so I would appreciate if you weigh in on that. But my question is, what separates an astute scout from a media scout in assessing talent?
Well, that is, I will say that there are probably 30 GMs and president of baseball operations that would like to know the answer to that question, because I know scouts are held to sort of quantifiable measures, just like anybody else in baseball these days. But it is, other than saying, I got these right, which is really kind of how scouts still operate. The scouting world is, you're a legendary scout if on the amateur side, and amateur is the guys who scout American high school and college players for the draft. If you can say, I signed X number of players, you're a really good scout. And on the pro side, it's, I recommended X number of players for trades who turned out to be good. And that's really how it's done. I think that there are scouts. I will say Dick Tidrow was somebody who absolutely fits this. Dick Tidrow was almost a savant in his ability to look at young bodies and imagine what they could do. He simply had some kind of genius that wasn't taught and nobody else could learn. That I think the last story, one of the last guys he helped the Giants draft was Logan Webb. And years before Logan Webb ever threw a changeup, he watched this 18-year-old who was mostly a high school quarterback throwing a bullpen session, and he watched the way his body moved and he watched his arm and he said, that guy could throw a great changeup. Took 8 years from the day he said that to when it actually happened. But that ability to look at a body moving in space, project how it's going to grow and develop and what it's capable of, is fundamentally what scouting is about. And I am not a scout. Let me just say that. I talk to scouts a lot, but when I talk to them about what they're looking at, their ability to take in visual data is kind of astonishing to me. The amount of information they can get from looking at a swing or a pitch is extremely high level, and they're processing a lot of stuff. And of course, nowadays, their looks at the field are a small portion of what they do, because they're also looking at data and they're also looking at video and they're putting it all together. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is the ability to look at a body and imagine what it might do given age and maturity and development beyond the moment you're at, which is a pretty incredible talent when you think about it.
What about my first statement about having the best pitchers go against the promising hitters and vice versa?
Well, I will say that the Arizona Fall League, which is a league MLB puts on for itself, which is sort of a prospect showcase in the fall, is as close as they can probably get to that. The problem with it is it tends to be all the best hitting prospects and not the best pitching prospects, because every organization is concerned about their pitchers throwing more innings. They're all coming down to fewer and fewer innings rather than more and more innings. So you go down to the fall league and it's mostly a lot of great hitters and a lot of pitchers, because the organizations are afraid of sending a pitcher down there and having their arm blow out. In the winter leagues, like the Dominican League, the Venezuelan League, the problem there is the major league teams have no real control over what those teams are doing. The Dominican League has been around for a long, long, long time. They're there to do business, kind of the way major league teams are. They're there to win. And mostly those rosters, if you look at them, are kind of older veterans, guys who washed out of the majors, or maybe are older and aren't playing in the majors. Fernando Rodney's been playing there for a million years. Pablo Sandoval still plays in winter leagues. Mm-hmm. But those clubs are locally owned. They have rabid fan bases that they're playing to, and they are actually trying to win, to get to the Caribbean Series. And so they're concerned with their own things. And the Giants, can't send Marco Luciano there and say, I want you to play him every day, and I want you to make sure he gets at bats against these other guys, because it's kind of out of their hands. They can say, no, I don't want my players going to the Winter League, which they do a lot because they're worried about injuries, but they can't really say anything about how they're used once they go there. It's just out of their hands.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you. All right, our hometown man, Larry Suni, you are up.
Hey, thank you, Gary, and Roger. Thanks very much. This is really interesting, and I'm really enjoying your insights. I'm going to start with a statement. It seems to me that, for the past several years, particularly in the Zaidi administration, so to speak, we've been waiting for Godot. It's like Joey Bart or Ramos or whomever. The pitchers, they do seem to be coming through. And now it's, Lucianos and Matos. Granted, Patrick Bailey did pretty well. Schmidt kind of flamed out last year. And, for a long time, I'd watch these scouting rankings each year. And I think they got up to like number 4 at one point. Now they're down to about 11 or 12. And last year they brought up a bunch of guys and I thought, oh, this is pretty good. But then I watched what the Reds brought up. And, it really wasn't pretty good relative to that. So how would you rank the farm system and its success, over the last few years? And, where do you see it going, both on the pitching and the position player side?
I mean, I think you are clearly right. And let me just say thank you for having me. I should be saying thank you to all you people. You're all thanking me. And I really like being here and having this platform. You're definitely right that they're ahead on pitching from hitting. I don't think there's any doubt of that. That's true both in the minor league side and the major league side. They've done remarkable things with free agent pitchers they brought into the major league side, getting careers turned around. They've done really good things with the players they've developed. Obviously, Logan Webb is sort of a great case study for that. Logan Webb was not. I mean, he was a highly regarded prospect within the Giant system. He was not sort of one of these guys who you read about as best prospects in the game. Camilo Doval, they have done a really good job at developing pitching. And I think in part that's because the industry in general is ahead on pitching in terms of they know what good pitching looks like. And I'm talking about the actual ball data. They have, every minor league stadium has a Hawkeye system. They know exactly everybody's body movement. They know, down to 1,000th of an RPM, how fast the ball is spinning. They have, extremely complicated models that look at the shape, what they call the shape of the pitch, which is kind of its movement and its spin and its axis. So they take this and they say, if a ball is moving like X, if someone's throwing a fastball and it's avoiding gravity by 18 inches, it's not coming down as fast as the batter's eye thinks it is. Well, that's going to be successful. It's going to be successful at the University of Arkansas, and it's going to be successful in the major leagues. And they take these guys and they shove them up as fast as they can before they blow out their arms, because they know that their technology has told them that person's pitch, Landon Roop's curveball, is going to be successful in the big leagues. And so you push this guy up to the big leagues, say, okay, now we can teach you the subtleties. Nothing like that for hitting really exists. There are Driveline and pieces like this are getting into things that can help bat speed. But the thing about hitting is most of it is taking place inside the cranium. And we don't have the technology to record and quantify the process of how fast you see a pitch and how fast you model in your brain what it's going to move like and your ability to get your hands there. That's all kind of happening in this black box in our head. And the industry doesn't have as good of a handle on how to see it or how to develop it. So to that degree, I think the Giants are like a lot of other people, although other teams absolutely are doing a better job of developing hitting. And the other thing is, when Zaidi came aboard in 2019, the Giants farm system was in a bad place. It had fallen into disrepair. And I don't think there's anybody who would deny that. They hadn't had success in the draft mostly. over the previous decade. I've been asked many times why I think that is, and I'm not sure I can put my finger on something. I think maybe when a lot of the industry was suddenly going through a kind of technological and data revolution, the Giants farm system was, Fred Stanley and some people had been running it for decades. It just didn't catch up, and it just fell behind a revolution. And when Zaidi came in, they tried to start catching up, and they put a lot of money into player development. They built this state-of-the-art facility in Scottsdale for close to $100 million. They have hired mostly new coaches. They have utilized a lot of cutting-edge technology. So I just think they were a little bit starting from scratch. And it's getting there slower than anybody who is either a fan or employed by the Giants has wanted. But I do think we are at the end of the pandemic. When we came out of the pandemic in 2021, the Giants had a ton of talent who had either never played or they'd never played above rookie ball. And it's just taken a while to get those people up through. There has been attrition. There is always going to be attrition in player development. The default outcome of minor leaguers is going to be failure, that they're going to be not good enough to be a major leaguer. We have seen a couple of high profile guys flame out, which hasn't been good. They've lost a lot to injury, which has hurt them. But we are seeing some of the guys they've been waiting for, Harrison, Luciano, Matos. We are seeing those guys get up there, and there is last year's draft, I think it's the best one they've probably had since 2020. Bryce Eldridge, who Gary mentioned, Walker Martin. They also have a kid coming up from the international side of their house who looks like he's the best prospect since Luciano, and Matos, a 17-year-old named Rainer Arias, who can really hit. Again, it's going to be a while for him to get up. But I do think process-wise, they are starting to turn a corner. Now, the proof's going to be in the pudding, because we're going to see Luciano in the majors, for some considerable portion this year. We're going to see Matos in the majors this year. We're going to see Bailey in the majors. They have to produce a hitter who is a quality major league hitter. They really have not done that with a young player in these last 5 years. And at some point, they either have to do that, or you get questions about why you can't do it.
Thank you, Larry. Howard, you were up.
Yeah, hi, Roger. How you doing? Just some general questions for you. I live in New Jersey. I have family on the West Coast, and I'm going out there at the end of April into about the first 10 days of May. They live near San Jose. Now, at the start of your presentation, you mentioned San Jose. Is there a minor league team there? My family live, my daughter, my son-in-law, and my granddaughter, they live in Los Altos. I don't know if you know it. But is there a minor league team in San Jose or thereabouts in any other the communities nearby?
Yeah, my college roommate lived in Los Altos, so I know it well. Yes, the San Jose Giants, which is one of the 4 or 5 longest affiliation relationships in baseball. San Jose is actually part owned by the San Francisco Giants. They are the low A affiliate, which is the lowest of the full season levels. There are 4 full season levels: A, high A, double A, and triple A. San Jose for a long time was the high A, but they changed the Cal League to be low A when they rejiggered the minors 4 years ago. So that is the low A team. It is frequently a place where the Giants really like to have a lot of their best prospects, because they obviously can go watch them and keep them under eye. And this year it should be maybe the most exciting team in the farm, certainly the first half of the year, because these guys I've just been talking about, Bryce Eldridge, Rainer Arias, Walker Martin, who's another high school player they took in the second round last year, should all be there. And that's going to be, I would say, the best group of young hitters they've had since Luciano and Matos and Alex Canario were at San Jose back in 2021. So this should be a great time to go see the San Jose Giants. I would say they play at Excite Ballpark, right by the university, an old warhorse of a stadium. fairly close to the airport, easy to get to. The churro man is always walking around handing out churros, and the beer batter strikes out almost every game to get the fans a free glass of beer. It's a great night at the ballpark.
Well, I hope to get to a minor league game when I'm out there. I'll be there the end of April, early May. I assume the season will be underway by then. Hopefully, I don't know what the weather is like in San Jose. I've been to games in San Francisco, and I've frozen there, especially at Candlestick.
San Jose is much warmer, much warmer. It's very nice.
I've been there. I've been to the Winchester House, I think, near where the guy who invented the rifle way back when. I've been to some minor league games in New Jersey where I live. There are some good teams. There's where you got the Trenton, they're AAA Yankees, and then they have Somerset Patriots, which is a lower league, like an independent league, and the Lakeview Blue Claws. Actually, they're now called the Jersey Shore Blue Claws, and that's I think single A Phillies. And I really enjoy going to minor league games. I mean, first of all, it's less expensive. We get close to the players. I went with my son last year to Lakewood, and he had a friend who played with, I think, the opposite team, the opposing team, whoever they were. And it's amazing how more accessible you go down. Batting practice, they'll come up. They saw my son, and they came up and they were talking to us and met the manager. So I really enjoy going to minor league games. One more question. I am going to see the big club. I'm seeing the Giants play the Mets Memorial Day weekend. I have a season ticket plan, partial plan. So I know you've spoken about some of the players this year that are coming up. Is there any one rookie I should keep my eye on, or a pitcher in late May who will be already with the Giants? Because I don't really follow spring training. Yeah, I don't even follow the Mets in spring training. I've been watching the NCAAs and the New York Rangers. So I don't even know who's on the Mets. I know they were rained out tomorrow, opening day, and I'm supposed to go to that, but it's been pushed off till Friday afternoon. So is there any one player or pitcher I should really concentrate on, a rookie I'm talking about, who will be with the Giants on May 31st or May 25th, I think the game is?
Well, first I want to ask you a question, because it looks like you're wearing a Mets hat. Which team are you going to be rooting for that day?
I have to root for the Mets, but as I told this group many times, I grew up a Giant fan. My parents were New York Giant fans. I was San Francisco all my childhood, Willie Mays, McCovey. And then I eventually gravitated to the Mets because I was living in Queens, New York by then, 10 minutes from Shea Stadium. So I root for the Mets when they play the Giants now. It used to be the other way around in the 60s when the Giants were contending and the Mets were, the Mets, the 62 Mets. But I have a soft spot for the Giants, which is why I'm in this group. And I cheered them on in 2010, 12, 14. When they won in 10, I was ecstatic. First time in my lifetime. I remember 62, and I went home from school crying after game 7. I've repeated this many times to the group here. So, I'm wearing this because it's opening day, but I do have a Giant hat, a San Francisco hat in my closet right behind me, and a New York Giant hat. But I'll probably root for the Giants in that game. But I'd like to know, again, who should I watch for? With the rookies, especially because I know some of the big club players.
I will just quickly take a side trip to note that in 2002, my mom and dad came out to visit me on the East Coast, and they landed the day after Game 7 of the 2002 World Series, and I picked up my dad at the airport, and he says to me very glowerly, as was his way, "Guess where I was 2 days ago?" It's like, oh, this is gonna be a fun trip. Anyway, to answer your question, to some of the people that I have been talking about, Kyle Harrison, left-handed pitcher who is going to start game 2. He's going to start Friday in San Diego, and I think it's going to develop into a really good starting pitching for them. I don't know if they're going to keep Marco Luciano in the big club out of for opening day. I hope they do. He's a shortstop with just enormous power. And
a shortstop with power?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's more of a capable shortstop than a Gold Glove, a gifted defender, but he can play the position and he has a good arm. Hits the ball just, I have been blessed to see him in batting practice and stand just feet away from the cage, and the repercussion off his bat when he hits a ball is like being at a concert and standing in front of the bass amplifier. Like literally you can feel it go through your chest. I remember I was in Richmond one time and I was talking to the radio broadcaster, and he had his back turned to batting practice, and Luciano was taking swings, and he said, "Oh, is Lucy in the cage?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "Yep, I can tell. It feels different." So he's going to be on the club at some point. Whether he'll be there at that point, I don't know, but he is definitely one I would keep my eye on. Louis Matos is kind of the same position. He's an outfielder who can really hit. Doesn't have Luciano's power, but he can really get the bat on the ball. And the other guy who I really like, who's had a huge camp, is a pitcher named Landon Roop, who really throws. His curveball may well be the best single pitch in the Giants organization. It's a pitch that is so good that he can throw it over and over and over and still not get any contact on it. And just a tremendous young man. He's a North Carolinian who says, yes, sir, and no, sir, to every question you ask. A wonderful kid. So those are four people I would kind of keep my eye on. They have a bunch of pitchers, I think, who are coming, but that's kind of the cream of the crop. I will also say that the Richmond, the Giants AA team, opens their season in Somerset a week from tomorrow. Next Friday,
really?
They'll be there for a weekend series in Somerset.
Oh, thanks for letting me know. Maybe I can make it out there.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Roger.
you, Howard.
Appreciate all your help. Thank you.
All right. This guy's been waiting to talk to you for a real long time. Judge Jim, you are up.
Thanks, Gary. Roger, thank you for joining us. I'm a big fan. I follow you religiously on Twitter, and I listen to all your podcasts. I have to
I
say,
appreciate that.
the podcast today, you had some real positive vibes flowing from that one. You seem really upbeat, and I think part of it was the Chapman and Snell signings that you seem to like both of them. And I did too, and I think it's going to have an impact this year. But I want to ask, what do you see as the impact of the Chapman signing on the farm system? One of our favorites around here has been Casey Schmidt, and is he pretty much blocked now? I don't see him as a middle infielder, and with third base, it's going to kind of block him. And along the same vein, I think VR is even behind Schmidt now. And do you see either one of them having a real future with the organization?
The cop out of all baseball conversations is things work themselves out. But it's true that one way or another, opportunities will keep coming around, and you either seize them or you don't. I remember Zaidi talked about a conversation when he was really first starting, and he talked about, I forget whether it was Chris Taylor or Max Muncy when they came to the Dodgers. And it was really it was an IL stint. Somebody went on the IL, they brought a guy up, and he hit. And he hit, and he hit, and he hit, and they couldn't send him down. And Zaidi said, that's how long the runway is sometimes. It's a 10-day IL stint, and you've got a week to make an impression and not go away. From that perspective, I mean, Casey Schmidt's going to get more opportunities. There will be, whether it's, he's played a lot of second base. I am like you. I like him a lot better as a third baseman than as a second baseman, but he's a capable defender there. And, Tyro Estrada has, for all he's done the last couple of years, he has had a fairly lengthy time on the IL in each of these 2 years. I don't know if Nick Ahmed is going to, make it through a year if they add him to the team. And I don't know if Marco Luciano is ready. And Schmidt's played some shortstop. So somehow or another, I kind of think players are never really blocked. They're going to get an opportunity, and either they're going to force their way in through that opportunity, or they're going to do enough that some other team is interested in them. Either way, that's good for the player, and usually it's good for the organization, because if you have somebody who other clubs is interested in, that's going to help you in the long run. So I never worry too much about quote unquote blocking players, because the opportunities are going to be there over the course of a 162 game season. And it's really about, do you take them or not?
Okay. One more quick question, if I may. I hate missing on number ones, and Bishop and Bednar. Any hope for either one of them? I know that's the injury I think you were referring to earlier for both of those guys, but any hope for either one of those? Or
Yeah, Hunter Bishop has really just had the saddest injury luck of anybody I can think of, because in his case, it's been just a whole bunch of different ones. He had a turf toe. He had shoulder problems. He had Tommy John surgery. He had COVID. I mean, you name it, and Hunter has had it, which has taken him off the field. He is healthy. He played. I saw him several times this spring. He played in a couple major league games, and everybody I talked to down at the minor league camp, when I'd say, who's doing well, everyone said Hunter's having a really good camp. He's swinging it well. I think we won't know this for a week. I think he's probably going to get put on the AA club to start the season this year. He doesn't have a lot of games played. He was drafted in 2019, and he's only got a couple. I don't even know if he's got 200 games played in his career in 5 years. And it's just been one problem after another. He is an incredible athlete, very strong, very fast. I saw him in center field. He still looks like he can cover it. So he's going to go to AA and, good Lord willing, get a season under his belt to see what he can do. He's going to be 26 this year. So he needs it. He needs to do something now. Bednar is just a continuing mystery. He really, almost from the day he was drafted, has had trouble with back issues that have really kept him off the mound entirely. I saw him last fall. He missed all of last year with back troubles. He missed most of the year before. I saw him in the fall league, and he was not moving around well, and they ultimately shut him down. And his stuff wasn't there. He had trouble throwing strikes. It's just, if your back's not cooperative, you can't do much athletically. And it's also not something that there's a good roadmap for fixing, except hope that it feels better at some point. His situation is pretty darn concerning, I would say.
Again, thank you for joining us. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. John Burbridge, you're up. John, unmute, John.
Roger, thank you very much. This is really good stuff. I got two questions. The first, I'm a religious follower of all these 100 best prospects. And you got Baseball America, you got Keith Law, you got others. I noticed Keith Law has no confidence whatsoever in Luciano. He basically doesn't have Luciano in his top 100. He says he's not going to be a shortstop. He's going to be an outfielder. So what do you think about those lists? And the second question is, you're in Washington. You're close to Baltimore. How does Baltimore get every pick right? So that's just two questions I have.
Let me start with the first one. It is true. Keith has always said, Keith has very strong opinions, and it takes very strong opinions to do what he does. He has always maintained that Luciano is not going to be a shortstop, and that's not a particularly controversial opinion. Lots of people have always doubted Luciano was going to be a shortstop. He's tall, and he's kind of lanky framed. He doesn't look like a traditional shortstop. I've for a long time thought, I don't think it's going to work. He's got to be a third baseman or an outfielder. I will say last year when I was watching him in Richmond, and I got to watch him every day for about 2 months, at first he showed up and he was pretty stiff looking. He was still coming off the back injury, and he hadn't played in the field much during the spring. And I thought, wow, he's really stiff. But over the weeks, he started moving more athletically, more fluidly. And I'd watch him and I'm like, yeah, this could work. I think this can work. And I'm not talking about this guy's going to win a Gold Glove. I'm talking about he's very similar to Corey Seager. When Corey Seager was coming up with the Dodgers, everyone said, this is a guy who can't stay at shortstop because he's too big. And he's had a very long career as a shortstop, not because he is a particularly gifted defensive shortstop. He's had a long career because he's a capable shortstop who can really, really hit. And I think that's kind of the hope with Luciano. And I know the Giants have monitored it carefully as well. They, for all of the faith that they state publicly, they have their scouts watching him all the time and getting reports back. And I know last year they kind of started turning the corner to feeling like they could keep him there for a while. But I mean, if your question is top 100 lists in general, I will say I've always been a Baseball America believer. I think they're the Bible. I think they're the gold standard. They're the ones that if you run studies on how did they really turn out, you can see the quality. If you're like in the top 20 of their top 100, you probably had a really good career. That's the one I pay attention to, but they're all good information because the more information you have, the better. Baltimore, holy cow. It is absolutely true. They are doing more than just getting the first pick in the draft. They are getting everything right, and they are developing their hitters really, really well. This is the same group that Mike Elias, who's their GM, and Sig Maydell, who I don't know what his role is, but they both were in the draft and development for the Houston Astros. And before that, they were both with the St. Louis Cardinals. And while they were in both of those places, an awful lot of good picks came through their draft. They have a really good model, which is sort of, here are the things we look for in a player we're going to draft. And their player development knows what to do with those guys when they get them. And they really have hit on everything. It's Jackson Holliday was by no means a consensus top pick in the draft 2 years ago. In fact, I know people who didn't have him in their top 10, but the Orioles were convinced this guy is a star. They took him out of high school, and he's going to be in the majors this year, 2 years later. For Gary's question about Bryce Eldridge, well, if you're Jackson Holliday, that's a real amazing 2-year run from high school to the majors. That's about as fast as it can happen, and you shouldn't expect it to happen that fast. But it's not just that. I mean, they got the year the Giants drafted Hunter Bishop. The Orioles took Adley Rutschman with the #1 pick that year, and then Gunnar Henderson with the first pick of the second round. They're getting second-round picks right. They're getting fourth-round picks right. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but they have a secret sauce, and it's integrated between their scouts and their player development, and they are really cooking all cylinders with their hitters specifically. And right now, they're the envy of baseball because nobody else is doing it the way they are.
Megdal supposedly had that model he developed, and he's carried it with him.
You know, if you read what was the book that Evan Drellick of The Athletic wrote about that front office?
That book about the Astros. Yeah,
Winning Fixes Everything. In there, Megdal doesn't come off that well. A lot of people were saying his technical skills were old, and his model had all these problems, and they were trying to shove him out. But yeah, boy, the proof's in the pudding, isn't it?
Thank you very much, Roger. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Ed Freer, you're up.
Yes, thank you. I came up with a question as I was sitting here based on what you said, Roger, and a lot of this was informative. First off, though, I have a small sporting goods store, and about 5-6 years ago, the owner, she said she was, of the Richmond Giants came in. She saw my Giants memorabilia, my World Series pictures and whatnot, said she was going to send me a Giants hat from Richmond. So far, I haven't gotten it, but seemed like a nice lady. My question here is you're talking about the pitchers, how they can analyze that it's going to take an extra few seconds for the batter to pick up on the drop of the curveball. That's something I knew they could do, but I do read a little bit in metaphysics and neurology, studying the left side and the right side of the brain. And as we try to find out more about the inside of the brain, you can measure reaction time. In fact, that's a very important thing, how to measure reaction time. Have they ever put, and this is way off the wall, a couple of those things over somebody's head and say, yes, that's coming in at left and right, and a study on that? Way off the wall question.
I will tell you that there is virtually nothing in the human body that can be measured that they are not measuring. Every club, the Giants have, if you look at their media guide, there are about 8 guys, I think, who are essentially advanced degrees in biomechanics. I talked to people who work in baseball. I was at a Sabre conference a couple of years ago, and one of the people giving the presentation, I think, worked for Detroit or Cleveland, something like that. His previous job had been with NASA, doing studies on the human body in the space station. But this is really the level of employee that most clubs have in their front office these days. They have doctorates, doctorates in biomechanics is really, really common. And then the other most common thing is people who can write their own software platforms, because you want to take the data and chop it up with your own special sauce of whatever that special sauce is, and get an outcome that you want. But the level of detail in the game is such that last year I was texting a scout about a pitcher who I knew he liked and I liked. And I was saying, yeah, the stuff's been a little down. And the scout writes back to me. So this is a guy in Richmond I'm watching. The scout's out in Arizona. He writes back to me and says, yeah, I'm looking at it, and it's his elbow is a little further from his body when he releases his curveball than it was last year. He had that information because every minor league stadium, at least in the Giant system, has a Hawkeye system. And a Hawkeye system fundamentally records every physical movement that happens on the field for every game, and then puts it all in a file. So your bat speed is recorded, your strength of throws is recorded, your angle of your throwing arm is recorded, from the outfield or shortstop or whatever, how fast you're running. Everything a physical body does on a field is recorded. And then off the field, they'll take batting practice with these rings on the base of the bat that records bat speed and propulsion. They'll wear these vests that record trunk mobility, but also how well you are, how effectively you're bringing power up through your legs into your trunk. They have these things called force plates. So they'll have a batter stand on this plate and take a swing, or they'll have a pitcher stand on this plate and pitch, and it'll record how well you are creating power from the ground through your feet and legs. The level of sophistication of how the body moves is hard to believe, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. The great Dan Taylor.
Well, kind of a bizarre question, but the 1974 Fresno Giants, where the heck did you grow up?
I grew up in Lindsay, California.
Did you really?
I did.
Wow, Dad worked in the olive industry?
My dad did work in the agriculture irrigation industry, when not to more orange trees. I spent
True.
a lot of my high school years crawling under orange trees to cut off
when
the
did you
bottom,
leave?
to sucker the trees. When did I leave Lindsay? Well, after I graduated from high school, I went up to Chico and went to school in the mid 80s at Boston College, and later I was in grad school at in University of Maryland, which is how I originally got down here. Although I went back to San Francisco, I moved around a lot. But most
So you
of
got
my
parole from the Central Valley, is what you're saying?
in a way, yes.
Okay, well, a question from here in Fresno, and I've got two or three, but I'm going to narrow it down to one.
Now, why are you in Fresno if this is the New York Giant Society?
I'll let Gary explain later. From books I've written. Okay, so we got the Rockies here now, and trust me, they got prospects coming. Really impressive hitters,
Yeah.
and really impressive kids from Latin America,
Mhm.
which we're not seeing in the Giants organization.
Yanquiel Fernandez, good player.
Yes, Tovar just got a nice long-term
Ezekiel
deal in the
Tovar,
big
yep.
leagues.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's some interesting kids coming. Where the heck are the Giants in Latin America? The organization of the Alou brothers and Juan Marichal and Manny Mota, on and on and on. Where the heck are they in Cuba? When did they ever sign anybody quality out of Cuba?
So
Did I leave you speechless? I'm sorry, Roger.
no, I want to push back a little bit, because they actually have had a little success recently. I mean, obviously Camilo Doval is a very important player on this team, who they signed for $10,000. He was signed for a song. I'm, as I probably have stated clearly, I am a believer in both Louis Matos and Marco Luciano. This is another area. When Peter McGowan bought the Giants, and God bless him, everybody in San Francisco owes a great deal of debt to Peter McGowan. He not only kept the club there, he built that amazing stadium, and he also made it special to be a Giant or a
Right.
Giants fan. I mean, the Giants, if you were following the Giants in the 80s, the 70s, the 90s, it was often about acrimony and how people didn't want to be there and how soon they could get out. You know, I'll never forget Chili Davis with the stick of dynamite on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Peter McGowan made being the Giants special. The price of that to a certain degree was he always believed that their business model only worked if Oracle was packed, mostly on a nightly basis. And the result of that was all of their cash flow that they had available went to the Major League club. There was a famous incident in 2004 when they intentionally signed Michael Tucker on the free agent market a couple hours before they needed to. And in doing so, sacrificed their first round pick of the next year's draft. And the reason they did that was because they didn't have the money to both sign Michael Tucker and pay a signing bonus to whoever the first round pick was. So they essentially swapped the one what they moved their cash around is what they did. McGowan always believed that the resources they had needed to go into the Major League roster. And one result of that was they did not put the investment they needed to into the amateur and player development sides. And that caught up to him after a while. I think Tidrow being a genius saved him because they got those great pitching picks in the 80s or in the aughts. But fundamentally, they underinvested in a lot of non-major league parts of the organization. And the international market was absolutely one of those. I think around 2015 or 2016, they built a really nice facility in the Dominican Republic, the Felipe Alou Academy. And Brian Sabian said at the time, he said, frankly, the industry has passed us. This was too late. And I think he was right. The industry had passed them in a lot of parts of kind of the amateur scouting and player development world. They hired a new head of their international scouting in, I think, 2019, maybe 2018, from a different organization. And I think I've talked to him. He's been on my podcast. I'll plug my podcast. He comes on my podcast once a year when the new class gets signed. And I asked him, like, what happened here? And his answer was, well, we've clarified our thinking. We've tried to be more strategic about what we're looking for. We've tried to use data more, but he, in a nice sort of way, he said the administration before him was a little outdated, a little outmoded. They relied a little bit too much on personal relationships, and it fell into disrepair, which is why for 20 years, Pablo Sandoval was the only player they signed internationally who really had an effect on the team. And to this day, I believe Solomon Torres is the last international free agent signee who has ever started a game for the Giants, I think. I guess Osvaldo Fernandez would be in part of who was the Cuban refugee. That's the answer to your Cuban question, Osvaldo Fernandez. But really, Solomon Torres, that's the last starting pitcher they got out of their young international development. And that's obviously 30 years is way too long to go without getting a pitcher out of your international department.
I mean, we see a lot of Latins at San Jose, but they seem to wash out. I mean, there were a couple that I liked Matos when I saw him, and I really liked they had a catcher back then that I liked a lot, but just the bulk of them that come through just not big league guys. So I just wondered if their scouting wasn't very good or what the situation. I mean, I know they had the issue with Sabian where he brought the son of the Yankees Latin American coordinator with him, and that's the guy that got arrested for molesting young boys, and that hurt them for a few years in the Dominican Republic. But yeah, I'm just surprised that they're not with the legacy and the history down there that they haven't been more productive. But thanks, Roger. It's great to have you.
I'm not going to consign Matos to the washout ban. I still think he is
I'm not
going to
either.
be a good starting major leaguer. I mean, honestly, San Jose is the lowest rung. It's not it's the lowest of the full season rungs. Most of the players there are going to wash out. 2 years ago, they played Fresno in the Cal League championship game. And, most of the Fresno guys are going to wash out too. It's the nature of the beast.
Oh, of course, of course.
Thank you, Dan. We're gonna go to Charles and then anybody else who hasn't asked the question, if they want to, and then we'll go to Larry and then we'll wrap it up. That's okay with you?
Yeah, I
Roger?
was going to ask about Jonathan Sanchez. Is he not considered a Latin player, or I liked him? I was at his no hitter, so I'm biased that way. But
I love Jonathan
I thought he had a
Sanchez.
hell of an arm, but he didn't have a lot of control. But
So, yeah, the answer to that question is, as MLB kind of defines it, Jonathan Sanchez is an American. He was from Puerto Rico, I believe, and he
I think
also
so.
went to college in the United States. He went to a college named, I want to say, Ohio Wesleyan. So the Giants actually drafted him in the draft. So when I talk about players coming out of the international side of the house, it's literally the players who are not drafted, but are signed under a different set of circumstances. And it's actually kind of an ethical black hole, that international market. But these kids who are signed when they're 16 out of the international side, as opposed to kids who are drafted. I will say just one other thing. This is a hobby horse I've been on for years and years and years. MLB rules considers essentially kids who go to American high schools who are drafted when they're 18 or 19, and kids who are growing up in Venezuela and the Dominican Republic who are signed when they're 16, they consider them the same. And consequently, things about their development time happen at the same time. You get essentially 4 years before you're a Rule 5 eligible player, at which point you need to be put on a 40-man, or other clubs can poach you away. For an American high school player, that means they're becoming a Rule 5 guy when they're 22, like Kyle Harrison is right now. For a kid who's signed as a pitcher at 16, that means they're 20 and maybe they've played an A ball, and teams are supposed to make a decision on whether they're a 40-man player or not. Very frequently with pitchers, that forces them into relief roles so you can move them quickly. But I've just always found that to be unethical, or unfair, pardon me, is the word I was looking for, that these kids who are 20 are being forced to have their clock sped up because of the way MLB views them, gives them a disadvantage, I've always thought.
Thank you, Charles. Larry?
thank you
go
for
ahead.
answering my question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Larry, you have another question? Go ahead.
I do, and thanks for allowing me a second question, Gary. Roger, I have a question. It's a process question you may or may not be able to answer, and it relates to Joey Bartz, and it has to do with waivers. Now, in all likelihood, he's going to be put on waivers. Is that irrevocable, or can they pull him off and try and leverage some value if they think there are a couple of teams that might be interested?
When the whole JD Davis thing happened, I was in a long conversation about whether or not revocable waivers still exist as a thing. The last CBA definitely got rid of revocable waivers in August, when we used to see waiver trades, right? But it's less clear to me whether they have been eliminated entirely. I think they have, and that there's no such thing as revocable waivers anymore. Probably what is going to happen with Hart sometime in the next, I would guess, week, is he will be designated for assignment, which is a very technical baseball term, which means a guy has been removed from the 40-man and the team has 10 days to do something with him. They can try to work a trade for him at that point. And if they can't get one, they'll put him on waivers. At that point, all 30, the other 29 clubs will get a chance to claim him. A club that wants him, that maybe is low in the pecking order, might say to the Giants, we'll give you cash considerations, or, a low kind of lottery ticket player, but probably cash would be the best they'd get. If he clears waivers, which I think they hope he does, and it's possible because a lot of teams are already set with the roster, they could then keep him and do what's called outright assignment to Sacramento. You can do that with a player one time. They can clear waivers, and you can keep control of them and outright them to the minor leagues. So one of those things is going to happen. They are almost certainly going to DFA him. Maybe they'll get some small trade. Probably they're going to put him on waivers and hope to clear him and keep him in Sacramento.
Thanks, Roger.
Roger, I got one, I guess, older question and one new one with the team. On the East Coast, did you ever get to go to Norwich?
I don't know if "get to" is the right word for Norwich. It was kind of a big old air hangar that was always cold and windy. But yes, I have been there.
Did you when you were there? The two main prospects, I guess, were Madison Bumgarner and Tim Alderson. Did you recognize that Bumgarner was going to be a terrific pitcher, and whatever happened to Alderson?
Yeah, Madison Bumgarner's year in Augusta, his 18-year-old season in Augusta, which used to be the low A club for the system, is probably, arguably, the best minor league season anybody has had in this organization this century. It was astonishingly good. I remember his very first start. He got knocked around, and they'd been trying to teach him a new delivery, and he got knocked around that game. He said, "Well, heck, I'm going to go back to my high school way." Very Madison Bumgarner, and then he basically just never gave up a run the rest of the year. He threw like 160 innings, which is unheard of for an 18-year-old, especially now. He had huge strikeouts, so it was, yeah. I knew he was going to be a star. Ironically, the only time I only saw him once as a minor leaguer, and it was in the Eastern League, and he got knocked around, hit a batter, started a fight, and was thrown out of the game all before there were 2 outs in the second inning. So my actual minor league experience with Bumgarner was not that long. Or was not very, very wide. The star of that game, actually, that Bumgarner got thrown out, was Brendan Crawford. So I will say he also was a really good player on that team. He had 5 hits, and they came back and won like 12-11 in extra innings. What happened to Tim Alderson is what happens to pitchers sometimes. He was a little bit older high school pitcher. He had really good numbers his first year, but the reports on his stuff were always a little less than the results were. He didn't have a great fastball, and that declined even as he moved up. By the time he was in Double-A, he was more a prospect in name than he was scouts watching him, because the stuff just wasn't there anymore. He didn't maybe gain as much strength as they thought he would. What the arm has in it is sometimes a mystery. There's an old thing called tin stap. There is no such thing as a pitching prospect, which basically means pitchers' arms go sproing with remarkable frequency, because what they're doing out on a mound is not what the human body was made to do.
And my question regarding today's team: is there anything you see where Ahmed and Luciano make the squad together, and Fitzgerald, I guess, would be the odd man?
I just before I got on, I was texting with my brother, and I suggested that might be the outcome. The Zaidi Giants, it's the roster is a day by day thing. It's not going to be set tomorrow and stay that way. It's going to be set tomorrow and then reset on Friday and then reset on Saturday. I would not be surprised if, while they're waiting for Blake Snell to kind of get up to speed on his pitch count, and maybe even Keaton Wynn, that the first couple of days of the season carry more position players than normal. I can definitely see them have Luciano and Ahmed on the club. Excuse me, and send Fitzgerald down. I think it's gonna be really interesting to see how they decide that outcome. But ultimately, what happens tomorrow is probably going to be undone by Monday. So I wouldn't get too caught up in arms about the opening day roster.
Well, as you can see, despite us being the New York Giants Preservation Society, 95% of the people in here root very much for the San Francisco Giants, and I think you saw that by the questions tonight. Do
Well
me
done.
one last favor, Roger. Plug your plug the site again.
The site is There Are Giants, and you can get to it one of two ways, actually. You can type in Roger Munter, which is my full name, .substack.com, or simply type in There Are, the letter R, Giants.com, and it will take you to my site. I have at least one and sometimes two podcasts every week that anybody who's a free subscriber can hear. I usually have a mailbag once a week during the season that free subscribers can access, and then 4 or 5 days a week I do a full coverage of all the games and the highlights from the full minor league system that my pay subscribers get. So there's lots and lots of content on there for you if you enjoy the youngins on the Giants farm.
Lastly, give us your forecast for the season.
I think the Giants are going to go to the playoffs. I think Kyle Harrison is going to get Rookie of the Year votes. I don't know if he'll be Rookie of the Year, but I think we'll get Rookie of the Year votes. And I think next year, when you're looking at Baseball America top 100s, Bryce Eldridge is going to be in the top 50. I'll say.
Guys and gals, let's give it up for Roger Munter. Roger, the fabulous, great way to start off our season. We will reconvene in 2 weeks. I'm going to keep the room open if anybody wants to talk Giant baseball. But Roger Munter, thanks again, Roger. It's fabulous.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really fun, and I enjoyed meeting all of you. And go Giants!
And Roger, I will send you the recording if you ever need it for your site or whatever you might need it for. But it'll be on YouTube.
Thank you very much, Gary.
All right, guys, have a great night. I'm going to shut off the recording, and anybody wants to talk baseball, we can do that.